Welcome everybody to the weekly Shir and Chassidus in English, right here at Chabad of Rechavia. We're learning every week, Bezrat Hashem. We'll be learning another part of the davening with a different pasuk, verse, or paragraph in connection with the deeper meaning of Chassidus. We're on page 27. Just to jumpstart the class, I want to say something interesting on the verse that is 3 lines before the bottom, in the middle of the line. Shalom, Henny. How are you?
Shalom.
Please bring out an English Siddur. In English, it's the second to last line. First, I'll do the Hebrew. Az yirananu atzei hayar. Then the trees of the forest will sing before Hashem when He comes to judge the earth. So, this is still the first paragraph of the Shacharit per se. In other words, after we finish the brachot, the morning blessings, the reading of the Shema, and the korbanot, the offerings. So it's almost like we're starting from daven. You want to start on the right note. So the mentioning, it's not by chance that we mention the rejoicing of the forest and the singing of the world, because we should develop a feeling of happiness when we daven to Hashem with a sense of joy. It's a whole different davening than just davening with being depressed, God forbid. There's an interesting anecdote that there was a young yeshiva boy that came into the Rabbi for a yeshiva, private audience. Usually, they only had one chance a year for their birthday. That was the chance to go into the Rebbe. And he was very sad. His face was very down and depressed. The Rebbe said, in this room, there's no room for depression. In other words, you're coming here, be happy. Let's hopefully, change gears and to bring about a more of a positive outlook. So that's a great way to start the davening with on a happy tone. Okay, the first verse that we're going to learn is 6 lines from the top, right in the middle of the line. Zichru le'olam berito, davar tziva le'elef dor. In the English, it's 9 lines from the top, the last word. Remember His covenant forever, the word which He has commanded to 1,000 generations. So today, we want to delve a little bit deeply into this covenant, this brit, so to speak, this covenant between Am Yisroel and Hashem. So the first mention is in the next verse. What was in the literal meaning? What was the covenant made? Who was it made between? So he starts to say the covenant which Hashem made with Abraham, and His oath to Isaac. He established it for Jacob as a statute, for Israel as an everlasting covenant, stating, "To you I shall give the land of Canaan, which became Israel." The land of Israel. Mm-hmm. Okay? So, the subject of having a covenant is basically, the purpose is in order to make a strong bond between two individuals. There are different levels of covenant. That's what we're going to talk about soon. But first, as a starting point, that's the idea of a covenant. That we're about to daven to Hashem. Tefilah, the Hebrew word for prayer, for davening, is tefilah. One of the interpretations of the word, it means connection. So when we daven to Hashem, we're essentially connecting to Him. And that's alluded to by starting off the davening, that we should remember Hashem's covenant, that He established with Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, our three forefathers. So there are three types of covenants. One covenant is based on love and affection, which is dependent on something. So, for example, in the parsha talks about the covenant that Avraham made with Avimelech, so they each had sort of an admiration for each other, but there was nothing really deep that bonded between them. It was sort of an external type of respect. Let's leave on good terms, but there was nothing deep that bonded between them. For example, two people who shake hands and they want to do a business deal together, they didn't have any intrinsic relationship between each other, but the business deal is what connects between them. So if they're able to connect between each other, then the business deal will probably succeed, because they're both interested in a common goal. So that's considered love or connection, which is based on something specific. So the brit, the covenant between those two, is pretty basic. It's not very deep per se, because it can be easily broken. But they shake hands, or it's a kind of commitment, right? It's a kind of bond.
Business contract.
Correct. That's something like that. But I'm just emphasizing that it still is considered a brit. It still is considered some kind of bond. Now let's get a little deeper. The brit, the covenant that was made, Bein Abtarim, that we had on. And so, what did Hashem do? What used to be in the olden days, they used to, two individuals. Hashem is not a person, but two individuals. They used to do is they used to take a few animals, or one animal cut in half. Crazy thing, but that's what they did. And two people walked in between. That symbolized that really two halves should be one. So it's as if it's bringing the two together. And basically what they say, two friends, what they're indicating is that we recognize that something may come up which can shake our relationship. Nonetheless, we take upon ourselves a strong resolution that we're like one. Okay? So that's already beyond something which is based on rationale. That's something which is super rational. In other words, even though there might be a rational reason why for us to break up, we're still never going to break up. So on one hand, it's a stronger bond than the first. And the first one was based on a piece of paper, a handshake, a technical thing of business, for example. But this is deeper. This is not based on this is just two people that are just committed to each other. On the other hand, it still is two different individuals coming from different places and deciding to connect. But before that connection, there may not have been something deep, essential to their core, which really bonded between them. Then we have the third type of brit, of covenant, as we see in certain sources. This is very interesting, that they would take like an object, like a bracelet or something like that. They would cut it in half. Each one would take one half, and that would like keep them together. Which that basically means that it's not just hot air. They're actually holding on to one thing, which this object used to be one thing, and by each one tangibly holding on to it, that created a really strong bond between the two individuals. Yes, sounds like you have a question. It seems like.
Yeah, I never heard of that. Okay.
Yeah, it seems like it's from what I prepared. It seems like it's famous. I guess it's from a very, very long time ago, but there is such a concept. So, unlike what we said earlier, for example, that one individual walks between two parts, two halves of one animal. Over here, it's the opposite. Each one takes half for himself. And with this, he's proclaiming that when, in the event that they will go in the part ways, the connection and the bond will remain forever. And that's it's symbolic of the two halves of this object coming together and really being one unit. Like, for example, it says, Ein Adam nifrad mechaveroi ela mitoch davar halachem. Something to the effect of that when two people part, or one person, let's say, travels away for a while, so they should first, like the last moment before they leave, they should say a word of Torah, dvar Torah, a word of halacha. Why? Because technically speaking, from a physical perspective, we could be far, it could be thousands of miles away. But because we learn Torah, and Torah is unlimited, and when we learn Torah, we're both bonding with one concept, one idea, which is very meaningful and holding us together. So just because you're going away a few thousand miles doesn't mean that we're really parting, because we're already setting the stage that we're one. The Torah is unlimited. The Torah is here and there simultaneously, and we're one. Just because, technically speaking, we're far from each other doesn't really mean much. So that's a similar concept on a spiritual level.
Learn that from Yaakov and Yosef.
Correct. Very good. Very good. Yosef, when he sent his brothers back to Israel to bring Yaakov, one of the things they said, he sent wagons. It's a play on words. It's Agala and Egla. Agala is a wagon. He sent wagons. And Egla Rufa is the mitzvah that we have at the end of Parashat Kitetse. Correct? And that is the mitzvah of if someone finds a dead corpse just laying in nowhere, no man's land. So we have to bury the person and see how is it possible that someone left and was not given food before, and so they have to take an egla, which is similar to the word of agala. And therefore Yosef was saying, I remember the last mitzvah that you, my father, taught me before I left. So I'm still in touch. I'm still learning that same mitzvah for the past 22 years. That's unbelievable. It's very, very deep. It's like some yeshivas that there's a non-spoken competition, a good, positive competition, that they want to see who learns deeper. So some yeshivas can say they learn 5 pages in depth for a whole year. Some say even 1 page for a whole year. And some say one Mishnah. So obviously it's exaggerated a little bit, but the idea is that we're able to go deeper and deeper and to spend more time instead of learning more qualities and quantity. It's more quality. Each one is fine. There are different yeshivas. I'm just trying to bring out the point. Okay, so these 3 levels of bonding we can compare between the relationship between Hashem and Am Yisroel. That's really what the objective is. Tefilah, right? We're going to start davening, and we want to bond with Hashem. So it's very appropriate to talk about this covenant that Hashem made with Am Yisrael. Okay. So the first covenant we said was an example of a love, a bond, which is a technical thing made between 2 individuals, which doesn't really have much quality, much meaning, much essence, but still, it's important. That is the observance of learning Torah and doing mitzvot. We make a commitment, Hashem, we are going to learn your Torah and observe your mitzvot. That's how we're here, right? We're here to make a better world, more of a holy world. How do we do that? Through learning Torah and performing mitzvot. When we establish such a covenant, we're not focusing that much on the inner relationship that we have with Hashem. It's just like a third issue, a third party, so to speak, which both sides agree on it. Hashem says, do my mitzvahs, and Am Yisrael says, yes, I'd like to do that, because through doing this, I'll connect with you. So it's almost, in the example of a business deal, it's similar to that concept. Hashem wants us to do the work, the mitzvahs, and through that to make a better world, and we want to have the reward. So it's pretty clear that we want this to work.
Each side gets what they want.
Correct. Almost as if it's technical. So the question is, why do we need to have this covenant, which obliges both sides forever? It seems to be like a regular business deal between a seller and a buyer, where one guy gives, the other guy pays, or an employer pays the employee the reward for his work. So if we're talking about the relationship between Hashem on the basis of employer-employee, that he's paying us for our work, so why do we need to have a bond? Why do we need to have a covenant for this? The answer is, without having this commitment, there is a concern that each one of the sides will find an excuse to nullify this deal. And therefore, we need to have this quote-unquote covenant, commitment, which, so to speak, obliges Hashem to pay Am Yisrael for our work. And at the same time, it obliges Am Yisrael to be loyal with learning Torah and doing mitzvot. So not to undermine its importance, but it still is. It is step number one. It's not the highest, not the deepest level of relationship between Am Yisrael and Hashem, but it still is something. In other words, like this: when you talk about creator and verse creation, there's a huge gap. As the famous analogy is, something to, I hope I'm saying it correctly, something to the effect of, what's a greater gap between 10,000 and 1 trillion, or between number one and infinite? One and infinite. Because the definition of infinite is that it cannot be defined. So therefore, there's no, even 1 trillion, it's a lot, but it's still a number. It can be measured. Infinite cannot be measured. So the gap between a creator and a creation is literally unlimited. They're in quality, they're different. Because a creation is obviously limited. It's a different ballgame. Therefore, one can say that even if Am Yisrael would serve Hashem with tremendous effort, as dedicated as they might be, they might want to be, there's no place to pay them, because it's almost like it's hard to give an example of infinite, but we're not really accomplishing anything, because Hashem is so much greater than us. So we did something. This is the famous statement, I think it's in the Medrash, that if you do something, it doesn't really bother. If you do something wrong, it doesn't affect him at all. Obviously, he wants us to do the right thing and not to do the wrong thing, of course. But if you think about it, Hashem is so great. Does it really affect him? It doesn't really, because he is who he is, higher than any imagination. Therefore, the Torah and mitzvot that we do fulfill in this world can have an effect on something which is related to the creation. Even though the nature of water, for example, is to go down, they can go up until a certain level. When you pour down the water, it has to go up. It can go up until the level from where it came from. So this is an example of something which is drawn down below, and afterwards it goes up to the height. It will never go higher than the first source. So too, the Torah mitzvahs that we perform can only reach until the source of the creations, which help Hashem's inspiration, which creates us. But it doesn't really reach the highest level of the essence of Hashem, because at the end of the day, we're creations and He's the creator. So it doesn't. There's absolutely no comparison. There's an interesting analogy from a king which comes to a town or a city, whatever, and he says, anybody can, you can connect with anyone in my, not in my kingdom, and what would you call it? Sorry, I'm drawing a blank. In the top ministers that surround me. So one will say, "Oh, I want to be connected to the minister of security, especially here in Yisroel, to be safe. I'll be safe." Another person will say, "I want to be connected to the minister of finance." Wow, you're connected in this country. It's all about connections. And if someone wants to be connected, oh, you have the right person. Another person will say, "I want to be connected to the minister of health." A great connection, and so on and so forth. And the Medrash says, of course, I'm saying it in other words. Medrash says, there was one wise person, and he said 3 words in Aramaic, similar to Hebrew, but it's very, very powerful. Ana Nasiv Malka. I choose. I want to connect to the king. Malka is like Melech. Why? Dekulhu mischalfin. All of the other ministers which have a certain badge, a certain mission, they can be changed. In 1 second, the king can say, "You're out of here." I know, especially in the real kingdom where the king has the whole say. Not dictatorship, like whatever. I guess it's a kind of. But the king, a malka einem schal. The king never gets changed. So a person might think, "Oh, I could be connected to this minister or that minister." But the wisest thing is to get connected to the source. That's the king, who he makes the appointments. And so, when it comes to this relationship between Am Yisrael and Hashem, what we should be looking for is the king. What we should be looking for is a meaningful bond. All the other things are wonderful. Let's say you want to talk about, in the example of our bond with Hashem, some person can say, "Oh, I want to bond with the midah, the attribute of chesed, of kindness." Oh, if Hashem gave me kindness, so it's obviously Hashem, but it's through a certain channel, through a certain funnel. Another person will say midat hanetzach. Another person will say malchut, and then one person will say ana nasiv malka. I want Hashem Himself. It's almost like the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya. Apparently he said it more than once. He used to say, when he was in a great, deep meditation, tzaddik meditation, not a regular meditation, he would say, "Hashem, I don't want your olam hazeh, the materialism of this world. I don't even want your olam haba, the next world, Gan Eden, all the reward, the world to come." In Yiddish, it sounds the best. Ich will nur dich allein. I only want you. Wow, it doesn't make any sense. You can have reward in the world to come. It's a spiritual world. You don't want the reward in this world? Okay, fine. But in the next world, olam haba, what do you mean you don't want it? It's a deep level of understanding that it's amazing to connect to Hashem even in this world. Olam hazeh. It's even more amazing to connect to Hashem on a spiritual level. Olam haba, the world to come. But even that is somewhat limited. Because when you're talking about creator versus creation, as high as you go within the realm of creation, it's still creation. It's still limited. It might be holy, it might be great and rewarding, but it's still not creator. You want to bond with the Creator Himself, with His core and His essence? Anan Nasiv Malka. That's the wise guy. Pikeach Echad. And he said, I want the King Himself. Because if I can reach that level, that I want to connect to the King as the King is on His own, that's something which is the ultimate goal. Yeah. Yes.
So up to now, we're talking about the bottom level, the first level of the
That's a good question. So we've already gone up. We've already gone up to the second level. The second level, because the first level is like technical. It depends on something. So let's say in the parable of the analogy of Am Yisrael doing mitzvahs connecting to Hashem, the Torah mitzvah, with all due respect, it's great. But it's something specific which, I don't want to undermine in any way Torah mitzvahs, but in comparison to connecting to Hashem himself, through that we do, but it's that itself is sort of technical. Okay? But then you're talking about walking through, for example, in the second level, which is not dependent on anything. Just two individuals walk through between two halves of an animal or a few animals. Is there any logic to it? There's no logic to it. It's just for the sake of bonding together. That's it. The two individuals want to be together. So even if there may be something that may come up later on in the relationship, it doesn't matter. It's not going to shake their commitment to one another. Because, as we just said now, the person says, Anan Nasid Malka, the person wants the king. So it's not, I'm not going to negate, God forbid, Torah mitzvah. It's just a second level, a higher level, another stage in our commitment and our bond with Hashem. Another example of bonding, which is not quote unquote dependent on something. It's obviously it can be looked at from different perspectives, and it can be looked at more serious, more essential, or less. But still, in the general picture, I think it's a good example. And this, at least, this is what the sources say, that the marriage is called a brit. Brit is a covenant, and that's what happens under the chuppah. Under the chuppah, it's a kind of commitment that the chatan tells the kala tells the chatan, basically, that they're committing to each other to be connected, hopefully for a long time. And so, on one hand, you have the fact that it's two individuals. The Gemara quotes a verse in Tehillim that says, "Moshiv Yechidim Baita." It takes two individuals, one from one country, sometimes another, one background, another background. Like who would ever believe? And they can hopefully live under one roof. Now, here's the point. It's not just technically living under one roof. Hopefully, it's connecting to the second half of one's soul. So if we look at it from that perspective, it's not something which necessarily opened up and started one day, and it's not technical. It's deep. It's essential. It's really two individuals that may be different parts of the world. But what's happening? They're able to eventually, through one way or another, to meet and to resolve and to make a resolution that they're going to build a home in Am Yisrael. So that's revealing that essentially they're connected even before they met. Well, one of the nice that my wife told me before we got married, that it's known that what I'm going to say now is known that two halves of one neshama. So there are mitzvahs of the guy and mitzvahs of the wife, of the girl. Mm-hmm. So after they're married, so it's they're basically completing one another. Each one does their own part, and that's how they become one nice whole. But what she told me, remember, she told this to me that even before they're married, because Hashem knows who's going to marry who, so even before they're married, they already not knowing about the other one existing. But the fact is, they're two halves of one neshama. Isn't that a nice concept? I think it's very nice. So even before they meet, they're already completing each other. They're already connected on some level, even if it's not mindful, but still, it's still the truth. So that's more of an example of the second level, which we're up to now, which is not based on something. It's based on something specific. It's based on the core, which they really have a relationship between each other. It's like, for example, the Torah tells us in Parshat Ba'alotcha, the mitzvah that we should make trumpets And at certain times, we need to sound these trumpets. Over there, it's talking about in the Midbar, when we're traveling through the desert. It talks about this different stations that we stopped at, stopped off at different parts of the 38 years. So it says over there that you should make aseh lecha shtei chatzotzrot kesef. We should have 2 trumpets of silver. Excuse me. So the Maggid of Mezrich, the successor and the student of the Baal Shem Tov, and the Rebbe, the teacher of the Alter Rebbe, of the Baal Atani, the founder of Chabad, he was a great Rebbe, the Maggid of Mezrich. So he said, you should make 2 chatzotzrot. That's the Hebrew word for trumpets. So he interpreted beautifully. It's a play on the words, comes from the words shtei chatza'ei tzurot. Excuse me, please. 2 half images. What does that mean? That Hashem is half an image, and we are half an image. So we have a mitzvah. Obviously, this is on a more metaphorical level, but still, it's a nice interpretation. That when you combine two images which are similar, or 2 halves of one image, so then you have a nice picture that comes out. It's nice and complete. So that's the myth. That's how we have to view our relationship with Hashem, that really we are 2 halves. And the other truth is that we have to look at each other as being 2 halves. That each Jew is not alone. We're not just a separate individual, and we're saying, you know what, let's bond with someone else. Let's be friendly. Let's have Avat Yisrael. But we're 2 halves of the same coin. That's the machatzit shekel, a similar concept. The half a shekel, the mitzvah that we have, that every single person has to bring a half a shekel to the Beit HaMikdash, the Mishkan, whatever it was. That's the mitzvah when we view ourselves as being only a half, when we realize that the other half is really another Jew who really completes us. Okay. Okay, now we're up to the 3rd level. This is a little deeper, but we'll survive. What did we say the analogy of having a 3rd level of Brit of the covenant? We take an object, a precious object, often like a bracelet. They cut in half. Each one takes half, and even if they part, they're still essentially connected. This is an analogy for Galut. Galut, exile. Most people, we're human beings, I totally understand why. Most people view the idea of Galut that, God forbid, that Hashem left us. We're alone. And it makes it very, very difficult to be able to cope during a time of exile in general, specifically a time of suffering, time of concealment of Hashem's light, and makes it difficult. But Hashem tells us, Imo anochi b'tzara, in Tehillim chapter 91. Hashem said, I am with you in any trouble. Now, obviously, Hashem is not limited. Usually, when one person chooses to be with someone else and they're in trouble, so they can also sort of, let's say they go to visit them in jail or in a hospital, whatever it is, they're basically, in a sense, that person for that half hour is also in that atmosphere of trouble. But how can you say that Hashem is with us in trouble? Hashem is unlimited. When a human being is in a troubling situation, he usually can't get out of it himself. But Hashem, not limited, of course. So here's the catch. When Hashem says that He is with us in trouble, when Hashem says that when we go out of exile, Vishav Hashem Elokecha ad Shvotcha, He is going to return with us. It doesn't say Veheshiv, He's going to bring us back. It says Vishav, He Himself, so to speak. We don't know what that means, because Hashem is infinite. What, Hashem is in exile and He goes out of exile? What does that mean? It doesn't mean literally. It means the Shekhinah, the divine presence, in Hashem's infinite knowledge and His infinite wisdom, decides that he wants to be with us. Not in a way that, God forbid, he's limited, because that's clear that he's not limited. But he wants to be with us. So this, I want to hear if you have a question, but let me just please finish the thought. So this third level is a very, very deep level where it's not only where everything is fine and dandy and we're bonding together and akol tov v'yafeh, everything is fine. The chidush, the innovation over here is that our bond with Hashem is so deep, it goes far beyond the technical observance of Torah Mitzvah, which is important. It's crucial. We can't do without it, but it's step number one. It's only step number one. It's even more than the second level, which is not dependent on something with some kind of deal. It's essential. But it's also a good relationship. Then level number 3 is such a bond that even if it seems to be chas v'shalom, God forbid, it seems to be a time of trouble, even then, the bond is there. There's a story which I heard many times of a bunch of Chasidim that were sitting around the table, like 150 or maybe 120 years ago. I think the time the Rabbi Rashab, between that time period, something around those 30 years. And each one, different Chasidim from different rabbis. And each one was saying a miracle, why they feel connected to their Rebbe. One person said, I don't know, he got, I don't know the details of the story. The Rebbe gave him a blessing and he became very rich. Another person said he I don't know, he had this miracle and that miracle, and that's why they became the chassid of that Rebbe. And therefore, each one said, my Rebbe is the greatest. Look what miracle he did. And the Chabad chassid said, and let me tell you about my Rebbe. He gave me a bracha for parnasa, for livelihood. I hope I'm saying this accurately, something to this effect. And so they said, no. And what happened? He said, I did not make the money. So they said, what's the miracle? The miracle, he said, is that I'm still a chassid of my Rebbe. So I don't know the exact details, but the point is that the bond between a Jew and Hashem, a child and the parent, a chassid and the Rebbe, however you want to look at it, there's a concept of bond which is much deeper than whether or not something worked out. Because it's not dependent on that. Even if something happens that the miracle or the issue is not solved, that does not shake in any way, shape, or form the essential bond that connects with the core of one individual with the core of the other individual. And that's unbreakable, non-breakable. And where do we see it? We see it in a time, chas v'shalom, God forbid, should never happen again, but in a time of need. When Am Yisroel, we saw what happened a year ago on Simchat Torah. We saw the unbelievable strong faith. I myself went to a number of army bases, and you see the soldiers dancing. Anachnu mamin, bnei mamin, and we are believers, the children of believers. Are they normal? They're about to go into war zone. Everybody with Hashem should protect them. Everybody with a little bit of brains knows what, God forbid, can happen in such a situation. What are they dancing for? They should be crying. They should Tisha B'Av. No, because we're talking over here about such a deep emunah, such a deep level of faith, that not only does a troubling time not pull us down, on the contrary, it strengthens us. It strengthens the bond. And this example could be in many situations, whether parents and children or spouses. When a person is able to take a challenge and to grow from it, that brings out the best. That brings out the deepest bond, deepest relationship. A relationship that comes after one makes up, after a trouble, friction may have happened, then the bond is much deeper, it's much more meaningful, much more powerful. Wow. So in summary of what we've just learned, we learned about the Zichru le'olam brito. Remember his covenants forever. We're starting to daven now. Let's remember Hashem's covenant, whether it's the first level of covenant, where it's based on something technical, some kind of agreement, or something that each one can excuse me, please, that each one can benefit from, or the second level. It's not either or. It's a stage. They're all important. The first level, Torah and Mitzvot. The second level is a dedication to Hashem, which is like the covenant walking between the parts of the animal, connected to Hashem's essence, beyond anything which shalutli abadavar is not dependent on anything. And then ultimately, the third level, which is the deepest level, which comes out that even if something doesn't seem so smooth, it doesn't shake at all the deep covenant between them. Yes, Benny, did you have a question? Okay, I thought you had a question. Yeah, questions are good.
So where does the Brit Milah go into those?
Excellent question. Rabbi,
Parsha Lechlech, we have all three of those.
You're great.
Brit.
Great point. Okay, so Rabbi Diamond mentioned that the Kiddush of the Farbrengen, he mentioned something interesting, that the Medrash, he quoted from the Medrash. The Medrash says that Yishmael and Yitzchak used to have an ongoing, not fight, like a conflict. Thank you. That Yishmael used to tease Yitzchak, and he would say he was 13 years older than him, and or 14 years older than him, to be more accurate. And he would say, "I'm better than you. You're a little baby, 8 days old. You couldn't say no when you had your brit. When I had my brit, I was 13 years old, and I could have refused." And Yitzchak said, "No, I'm better than you. What do you mean? I did this in the mitzvah of Hashem to have a brit milah at 8 days old." So a regular person, ask anybody, who's better? Yitzchak or better? Who's a higher level of covenant, of fulfilling the mitzvah, quote unquote? Ishmael or Yitzchak? Most people will say Ishmael. Makes sense what he's saying. The answer is Yitzchak. Why? Because what was Yishmael's covenant based on? Some kind of rationale that Avraham convinced him, and that's nice that he agreed to it. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. We really admire it. But at the end of the day, it's a covenant which is based on rationale. So if tomorrow I'm going to bring Einstein, and Einstein will what's the word? He'll ask a question, and he'll the word for it. He'll override that reason that someone gave yesterday, and he'll convince you why not to do it. Well, after the Brit Milah, it's already done. Can't do it. But technically speaking, if it's made up of another type of bond, then tomorrow you won't believe, because someone gave him another proof and gave him another reason to say why it's not a good idea to connect with Hashem. But Yitzchak, that represents the bond of 8 days old, it's not a weakness. It's a strength. What we're telling the child is, I'm not getting into the fact that it's apparently not even painful for the child, but I'm not going there right now. I'm just talking about the mere fact of the mitzvah of Brit Milah. The fact that we do it when he's 8 days old, what are we basically saying? That your bond with Hashem, that we are imprinting now, that we are establishing now, is something which is super rational. It's something which goes far beyond any kind of excuse and explanation. And even if someone's going to come tomorrow and is going to ask you a question, saying, "How could you believe in Hashem and this and that, A, B, C, D?" Doesn't matter. Nothing is going to shake it, because it's not founded, it's not based on rationale. The basis is super rational. And therefore, getting back to your question, the idea of the Brit Milah is something which is so deep. It's not, like we said earlier, either something which is tluya b'davar, dependent on something, or einat tluya b'davar, not dependent on something. The Mishnah talks about a love which is based on something, a verse of love which is not based on something. This is something which is not based on something, on a exactly, a rational excuse. Rather, something which surpasses that and goes far beyond.
To also say that Yitzhak had a,
Thank you for coming.
based on the emunah of his parents, had a spiritual protection that surrounded him because of the breed that took place at 8 days, as opposed to say
Ishmael.
Ishmael. It'd be similar to putting a mezuzah on your doorpost. That because of the parents' emunah and obedience, that he already has a spiritual covering around him that now proceeds with him throughout his life.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Yes, Hanaf.
I had never heard of the conflict between Ishmael and
Yitzhak.
Isaac. Is this somehow connected with the conflict of Sarah?
It's a very interesting question. I'm not sure. At first glance, I don't see a connection. But it's possible on a deeper level. We have to delve a little deeper into that. But at first glance, it's another. I'm sure it's on some level they're all connected because they struggle between good and evil. But over here, it's within good itself. But once you associate it with only what's based on rationale, so it's the building is all based on the foundation. So if the foundation is strong, which is super rational, then the building is strong. But if the building is only based on something which is technical, then if you take away the foundation, then someone's going to come tomorrow or the next day, and just to ask a question, and thereby shake one's faith, then the whole building come crashing down.
Sarah could be protecting Isaac.
I believe she did. She tried. It was because of things like this that Yishmael would tease Yitzchak and made him crazy. That's one of the things that led to Sarah throwing Hagar out. So I don't know if it was a similar argument, but it instigated that Sarah, she couldn't take it. She had to protect her son. Okay. Okay, how about if we stop here? Yesher Koach, thank you so much for joining us. Bezrat Hashem, next week, once again, we'll continue with the next part of this paragraph. Hodu according to the teachings of Chassidus. Thank you.